I had to educate myself. I had to talk to other people. I had to read. It's not like I woke up one day and said, oh, yeah, I heard this word colonization and I know what it means. It's not taught in school. You know, not that I was ever taught anything in school. When I went to school, they said, okay, all the Indian people just move to the back. Just sit at the back of the class because you're never going to be anything. All the white folks can sit up here because that's who's going somewhere. So I knew what colonization was. I just didn't have a word for it, you know. The very first rally that was called here in Albuquerque. The one called here was by a lesbian of color, and she called a few of us up and she said, you see what's happening in New York? And we're like, yeah. She's like, we should do something, and we're like, yeah. So we called a march, and here in Yale Park, many of us who have indigenous roots came early in the morning, and we swept the land with medicine, and we just walked through the land with that medicine to cleanse the land and to call to the land to participate with us, to be a part of us, with an understanding that we belong to the earth. The earth doesn't belong to us. And then people came for the march that very day, said, okay, we're going to encamp. Just within a day that we started talking about anti-oppression politics and not being hierarchical, and how Occupy was a hurtful word to many indigenous people. To people who have an analysis of colonization, they know that this land has already been occupied in a brutal, genocidal way. I was excited that our country here, the people in this land, had, clicked for them, and we were going to rise up. But I was disappointed that the best word we could find was a militarized word, and then Occupy of all words.
And I think Occupy Wall Street is a very different thing, right? Because it's occupying a financial institution, whereas you can't occupy an entire city. It just doesn't make sense. And so some of us came together, had that conversation and said, this is a great movement, but then it's really difficult for people of color who have been colonized both inside the United States as well as across the world. And so we made a proposal to change the name from Occupy Albuquerque to Decolonize Albuquerque.
We would meet and talk about the name and about colonization. And those meetings were like 5 and 6 hours long. And we did that 3 or 4 Sundays in a row. I mean, that's what consensus is.
It's very inefficient, in a sense, to aim for 100% consensus. And it takes a very long time, and at times it can be really painful. But at the same time, if you just stick to that process, if you allow people the freedom of standing aside, of blocking if needs be, understanding that that block is then really a sacred tool, not to just be overused, then eventually you do end up with a group that feels comfortable with that process, that really believes in it. Going through a painful process like this, people then really do come to understand each other. It's not that we agree on every point, it's not that. But in broad strokes, we're cut off the same cloth.
Consensus is also a process that indigenous folks throughout the world have used forever. A lot of us in this country feel that we want things now. Consensus doesn't work that way. Consensus is about building relationship. It's about me hearing your story, you hearing mine, and we find our commonalities.
The first time that we brought the Decolonize Albuquerque forward, there were at least 9 blockers out of maybe 100.
More, I'd say.
Somebody spoke up and said, I just want to remark that the 9 blockers, they are all white folks, and mostly male. Like there was one woman, I think. Everybody else was male and white. And I just want to point that out.
So it was a deep discussion, and we used anti-oppression politics so that all voices were heard. And when you do that, when you use anti-oppression politics and consensus, what happens is the power dynamic shifts. And so people that have been marginalized have a chance to come forward and be heard. But what that means is that people that who have had privilege are having to check their privilege.
Right from day one, we were very clear that if this movement is going to go anywhere, we all have to share power. And we cannot let folks who have always been in positions of privilege continue to lead us. If they wanted us to be a part of this movement, then they had to share power.
To use the word occupy in one of the largest indigenous land-held bases in this country would be wrong. And that's the thing that consensus and anti-oppression politics made us go to in our hearts.
The discussions we had about the name change then also set the scene that early on that this group wouldn't just tag on to what is being decided in Wall Street and not think it through.
Not everyone could have that analysis, and they did leave. It's not just the taking of land. It's not just taking over a government. Colonization is trying to make the indigenous people of that land, whether it's here or somewhere else in the world, invisible. So invisible that they die out. They lose their language, they lose their spiritual practice, they lose their land, their education, their civilization. It is a brutal assault on the people of a land. And so for us to go there and examine colonization means I have to examine myself. I have to examine how I treat other people, how I see other people, how I participate or don't participate in this system. It's hard for us to go there. We don't want to examine ourselves.
I think the process of understanding what decolonization is trying to find out where you come from. It's hard sometimes to know what you've lost because you don't know what you lost. You had it taken from you. Understanding your place in a larger, less individual concept. This concept of the American dream is colonizing. I think that people really feel like if I just work hard enough that I'll be part of that 1%. Even though we know that that's total crap.
So just to be aware of those things is a starting point for decolonization, and it's to figure out ways of living radically different from how we are living now. I mean, this life is just not sustainable. I mean, there's already a huge scramble for resources across the planet, and if anything, it's going to intensify in future, and unless we radically change the way we live. And I'm not just talking about less consumption, because I think that's only a minor dimension of the whole problem. It's about living radically differently. And unless that doesn't happen, we are doomed. And so decolonization is figuring out ways of coming up with communal processes that start thinking about how we can live radically differently from how we are living now. Because I also don't want to make decolonization sound all abstract and it's like, yeah, everybody agrees as long as it doesn't demand returning land back to people or not stealing other people's oil, things of that nature. And then folks are like, yeah, I'm so down for decolonization because it's all about loving each other. There is going to be a shakedown. I mean, people are going to lose their privilege. I think that's a huge part of decolonization.
Some people are very brave and can go there, and others just aren't there yet. And that's okay. That's okay. And that's why it's so important for us to share our stories, our lives. It's important for us to exchange and build relationship, but it's not easy. None of it is easy.
Occupy is such a baby in this whole 500 years that, you know, you have to kind of have a humble self to say, I'm on that path to resistance. I'm not, I'm trying to rid myself of these self-imposed oppression, helping people to see that I think is part of the work that Unoccupy can do.
For those of us in this country and around the world to have a revolution, we can have a movement, but to have a revolution, we need to understand those politics of oppression and how this regime in this country perpetuates that throughout the world. Colonization brought us all the isms, the racisms, the classism, the sexism. It's our obligation and our responsibility living in this country, in particular in the world, to make these examinations and have a critical analysis of oppression and colonization. We can come together as people of color and white allies in this country and have revolution. And we think of equality, you know, we think of this, but, you know, when things are, we think, you know, these marginalized people down here, we're going to bring them up to this level, right? And we're all going to be equal and we're going to have a revolution. But scales don't work that way. Scales, in order for this side to come up, this side, something has to be taken off this side, right? So to get balance, something here has to change so that it goes like this. Then we have revolution.